Hi, I'm Ellen from The Awkward Artist, and this is my first step-by-step slideshow tutorial on how I paint using soft pastels. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Thank you for joining me in this slideshow on how I painted a sulphur-crested cockatoo. I'm using New Art 400 dark pastel paper, A3 size. This paper is like sandpaper, but any pastel paper will do in any colour. The end result will look slightly different, but hey, that's art. I tape down the paper to a board so it doesn't slide around. There is no list of colours used because the colours don't really matter. It's the value, lightness and darkness of the colour chosen that counts. Trust me and follow along. It will be like the how to draw, paint and art books I loved when I was a kid. Only a few more steps. Please let me know how you go. Starting with an accurate but simple line drawing, I sketched the outline of the cockatoo using a white charcoal pencil. I want to make sure that I position him correctly on the paper and only put in the lines I think are important. Reference photo is courtesy of Megan Boundy. Take a black and white photo of the pastels that you've chosen. This will give you a good idea of your values. Arrange them on your palette tray in value groups. I like to put my lights at the top and go down to the darks at the bottom. As long as you choose the right value, it doesn't really matter what the colour is. Here are the colours I've chosen in black and white. The left tray is for the background, middle is for the yellow comb, and right is for the body. I've just chosen colours that appeal to me and are based loosely on the reference photo, looking for light, medium and dark values. The pastels chosen are what I think I will need to start with. I will often go back to my other colours and choose a different one, or I don't even use some of the original ones I've chosen. This just gives me a loose starter palette of the values I need, because choosing colours can be overwhelming, so simplifying it down to a few main values and colours at the beginning will help free you from distraction of worrying about what colour to use next. Using the side of the pastels, I can randomly block in some colours for the background from the palette that I've already chosen. As you can see, the light is coming from the right, so I use the lightest colours here. My strokes are light and random, and I cover all of the background, keeping the colours separate. Blending. I use insulation foam for blending. I picked this up at a hardware store in the pipe section. It's pretty cheap and I just cut bits off as I need it and then throw it away after a couple of uses. Using your fingers in initial stages can hurt, but the heel of your hand is a bit tougher so that can be used. The rough surface of pastel paper will snag cloth and cotton wool, etc. That's where the foam is so good. The foam won't snag. Experiment and you'll soon work out what works for you. I start to blend the background lightly using the foam insulation. I don't scrub but use the foam like a paintbrush and crosshatch lightly. I don't want to mix the colours too much, just soften them together and keeping the colours clean and bright. Now I add a few more lights and darks and blend gently until I'm happy with the way it looks. I used some light blues and lavenders to give the impression of some sky peeking through the greenery. And now I decide to add some random lines to indicate branches, and I use the side of a square pastel. I do both of these in light and dark. I can leave the background now as I'm pretty happy with it, and I can go back to it later if I want. So now I choose a mid-yellow and lightly fill in the comb area. Still using a light touch. I don't want to fill it in because I have so many more layers I want to add. Checking with a reference photo, I use a mid value and start placing some colour down on the body of the bird for the shadow areas. And then I add darker value as well. I'm still being fairly loose and light with my touch. Then pick up a lighter value. As you can see, I'm talking value, not colour. Trying to use the exact same colours as I am will drive you crazy. That's why I didn't put in a list at the beginning. Just use something similar. So far I have 3 values on the body, and it's a dark, medium and light purple. I've extended out the lighter value, filling in the whole body of the bird. Check that you haven't lost your shape, and if you have, add more of the dark value to bring it back. Using the insulation foam again, I gently blend, keeping the light and dark sections and keeping the shape of the body. Yes, this is the start of the ugly stage, but don't worry, we'll work through it. Keep adding the 3 values, defining the shadows in the lightest areas. Blending with my fingers now because there's enough pastel not to erase my fingerprint. By using my fingers, I have more control over the blending. I don't scrub, I just run my fingers gently over it to smooth it out slightly. Now that I'm happy with the 3 values I've already blocked in, I can add some colour to the shadows. I'm using a mid-blue over the darkest value to give it some depth. Purples and blues are perfect for shadows, even on white feathers. I've also just added a lighter yellow to the comb. I want to keep the contrast between the shadows and the white feathers high. I choose a very light cream and start adding the extra light highlights, still not completely covering the colour underneath. I want some of that colour to show through. Using my fingers, I blend out again, going the same direction that the feathers would be going. I'm trying to keep the contours and shapes of the body. It's looking pretty good, but the head is a bit flat and needs more shaping with darker colours. I want to make sure that I preserve the very deep shadows of the wings, underbody, around the head and the comb and beak. I use a dark pastel pencil that's sharp, and it's used here to add some really more precise shadow. The end of a pastel stick could also be used. Now we're blending again, but I don't want to touch those shadow lines that we've got there. I want to keep these fairly hard. This stage is really just adding lights and darks until you're happy with it. Don't be afraid to go pretty dark. As long as your layers have been light and cover, there'll still be plenty of tooth left to keep adding more. Okay, so adding some bright orange might seem wrong, but I want depth and undercolour as well as some interest. Don't worry, there's lots of layers to go on yet. I also add a little bit of yellow here on his cheek, just below his eye. Now it's time to also concentrate on the eye and the beak. I blend out the orange gently. I want it to be an undercolour and I don't want to spread it out too far. While there is no actual orange in the reference photo, you can see that it's adding warmth and interest, and it will be toned down later. I can redefine his eye and add some outer lines softly. Now I add more mid-tone yellow. I add it to the comb, his cheek, around his beak and a little bit on his chest. This softens out the orange a bit more. This is where you can see that it's all about values, not so much the colours. There's enough light tones to make the cockatoo still look white, even though white hasn't been used. Now I decide to really lighten up the head area, and here I add a soft blue-white pastel to the areas that I want to really stand out. I'm still using a light touch. Also, the same colour white-blue is added to the comb. I do a bit more blending now, but my blending is more patting with my fingers rather than pushing the colours around. I just want to soften out those lines a bit. I've added some of the lightest value pale yellow to the comb. I've also added slight touches of this to the cheek and the other orange areas. I pat it out slightly with my finger. Most of the orange on his comb is now covered, but you can see that it has now interest and shape. I'm still going backwards and forwards with my lights and darks. And now I'm going to add a little bit of more shadow to his head area and soften out those oranges still more. I use a mid lavender, and I also use the same colour to add a bit of light to his beak. Now I'm softening out that mid lavender with the lighter value lavender, and I cover all of those spots and just gently pat out with my finger. Some of that light colour is also added to his beak. If you lose some of your highlights and shadows in the blending process, you can keep re-adding until you're happy. That's part of the back and forth process with the lights and darks. Now I can concentrate on the eye and the beak. There isn't a highlight in the eye in the reference photo, but I think it needs one, so I add one in. The beak also needs some definition, so work on it by adding a few more darks. Here's a close-up of what I'm working on at the moment. Now the changes are almost imperceptible, but I gently dab blend the beak and around the eye. A few more highlights are added to the beak with a soft white. And while I have the light pastel in my hand, I also add the very lightest spots to the head and chest. Now it's time to step back and take a good look at my painting. It has colour, but it still looks like a white bird, and I'm pretty happy with it. I hear a coffee calling, so it's time to walk away. Now that I've had my break and I've come back, I'm still pretty happy with it. I decide to add just a touch of dark to the darkest and a bit of soft white to a few spots. That's it, it's finished. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I have inspired you to grab your supplies and have a go. Remember, we all interpret things differently, and that's what makes our art unique. I must apologise for the school mum voice. Happy pasteling.